A UN-led team is in Turkey to investigate Jamal Khashoggi's murder. It wants access to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul where the journalist was killed. But will it get in? And will this independent international inquiry make any difference anyway? Can Saudi Arabia be held to account? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rochelle Carey. Jamal Khashoggi was a critic of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The journalist was killed at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul almost 4 months ago now, but his body or remains have never been recovered, and the murder case remains unsolved. Turkey's not satisfied by the Saudis' own investigations and wants a full international investigation. What it's got is an independent investigation led by the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions. Agnes Callamard and her team are in Turkey for a week-long mission. She also wants to visit Saudi Arabia. Callamard said on Thursday that the 3-member legal and forensic panel would seek to establish states' and individuals' responsibilities for the killing. I conceive of this inquiry to be a necessary step, among a number of others, toward crucial truth-telling about and formal accountability for the gruesome killing of Mr. Khashoggi. Callamard, who had requested information from other authorities, including the United States, hopes this will help ensure accountability and transparency in this case and may open new avenues for the prevention and protection of the right to life in other cases, including of journalists and human rights defenders, and accountability for their killings. The Turkish foreign minister says the UN Security Council is unlikely to launch an international investigation into Khashoggi's murder.
It's time for an international investigation. The Security Council should take a decision to launch one, but we don't think the Security Council would make such a decision. The other option would be to establish a fact-finding special committee through the UN Secretary General or the High Commissioner for Human Rights. This committee could be sent to Saudi Arabia, Turkey, or a third country if necessary in order to reveal the truth.
Let's bring in our guests here in Doha. Sultan Barakat, Director for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies at the Doha Institute. And by Skype from Manchester in the UK, Carl Buckley, a barrister at Guernica 37 International Justice Chambers and a specialist in international human rights and transitional justice. Thank you both for joining us. Sultan, I'm going to start with you. How significant was Turkey's role in even getting this investigation this far?
Well, my understanding is that this investigation was actually initiated by the UN rapporteur for extrajudicial killing, and it was her own initiative. I'm not sure if it was initiated by Turkey. Turkey could have done more in terms of pushing the agenda at the Security Council and trying to get something with greater bite to it in terms of investigation and in terms of the results that are likely to come out of this. Having said that, I am of the view that Turkey, and particularly President Erdogan, has really orchestrated the release of evidence in relation to the Khashoggi killing in a very smart way and in a way that served Turkey's interest very much over a number of issues which we can come back to later in the discussion.
I'm intrigued by what you said. So you say, and you're not the only person to say this, that Turkey, released and leaked a lot of information, but you're saying that when it really came down to it, that did create some kind of public pressure, but you're saying that they could have more directly had something to do with this through the UN had they wanted to. Why do you think they didn't?
Well, I think ultimately what they'd like to see is a better relationship, first and foremost, with the United States and also with Saudi Arabia. And for them to be able to achieve that, they needed to do two things. One is to keep the pressure on Saudi Arabia so that there are greater degrees of compromises. And we already saw some of those in Syria in relation to Yemen and other agendas where there's common interest. And also at the same time, they had to ensure that they don't really affect or harm the relationship with Saudi Arabia to a level where it can never be reconciled. And this is why in his very important speech about a month after the incident in Ankara, President Tayyip Erdogan made a clear distinction between the King of Saudi Arabia and his son. And although he blamed the son to some extent for being responsible for this killing, he made clear that he had nothing but total respect to the king, and was very attempting at least to reconcile with Saudi Arabia as a state.
So the point being, even though we are talking about a brutal murder, there are still politics and a lot of things involved that have to be managed and juggled. Okay, that's all right. So, Carl, let me ask you, let's talk about the particulars of what this process is going to be now. What can you kind of walk us through now that there is a UN rapporteur involved, asking to see the crime scene, et cetera, et cetera? How will this actually play out?
That's a good question. It's going to be dependent on a number of factors. So the UN system of protection has a number of what's called thematic mandates for its special rapporteurs. So as we've already discussed, the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killing has commenced this investigation. There are also a number of different special rapporteurs dealing with other thematic issues, such as enforced disappearance, torture, independence of judges, etc. So how this plays out is going to be very interesting. There's going to be no issue with them getting into Turkey. That's already been determined. Requests have been made to enter the embassy, and a request has been made for an actual country visit to Saudi Arabia. Now, it's going to be very interesting to see whether those two requests in particular are granted.
Because does Saudi still really hold the cards?
It depends on how we see those cards, and I'm sorry for talking in the abstract.
No, please.
As far as permission to enter a country and visit certain areas, yes, Saudi Arabia does hold the cards. Of course, it does. And as far as entering the embassy, again, Saudi Arabia holds those cards. But it doesn't hold the cards as far as consequences and what may come out of this investigation. The fact is, this investigation has been commenced of her own volition as far as the Special Rapporteur is concerned. Therefore, it's an issue that she feels very strongly about, and she deems that investigation to be warranted. Therefore, if Saudi Arabia decides that it's not going to cooperate to the extent that people would like them to cooperate, now that's not going to influence the Special Rapporteur's decision. It's not going to influence any conclusions that she may draw from her investigation. So from that side of it, Saudi Arabia doesn't hold the cards now.
What does she need to really make this a thorough, credible, valid investigation? I would assume one of those things might be some information from the U.S.
No, absolutely. I mean, as far as any investigation is concerned, it doesn't matter what you're investigating. You always have a mental shopping list, so to speak, as far as what you would like to see. So you would want to have access to the area where the offence was alleged to have been committed. You would want to have access to all witnesses, potential and actual witnesses. You would want to have access to any forensic evidence, any previous investigations that have been undertaken, and particular as far as the USA is concerned, and specifically with what's been in the newspapers for some time, is that she would want to have sight of the intelligence that is apparently being collated, that the CIA have suggested points the finger at Mohammed bin Salman. So, yeah, she will want to obtain all information possible to make sure that the investigation is as thorough as possible.
Sultan, what are the chances of that happening? Donald Trump has not really condemned Mohammed bin Salman or Saudi Arabia in any meaningful way. How likely do you think it is that the United States would help the rapporteur with this, would turn over some of the evidence they have to give this some sort of credibility?
I think it's important to remember that the evidence the United States holds was given to them in the first place by Turkey. And it all goes back to the set of tapes which have obviously been collected as part of a surveillance of the consulate that may have been in place before the incident. Now, the United States what they've done is they looked at the evidence and they worked out the CIA report. It has been leaked, so she can have access to it. She may want to ask for it directly from the government. to make it a little bit more formal. But really, the key to this investigation is in Turkey, in Istanbul, and now in Riyadh, with the 21 people who have been accused formally by the Saudi government of being behind the killing. Now, 11 of those have been indicted. She would want to, ideally, to interview those people to understand better what went on. There will be no forensic investigation of any at any level, I don't think, because the evidence is already 4 years old. Things have been moved, tampered with, etc. She will have to rely on the investigation that was done by Turkey initially, and then by the Saudis. And the case can be and should be put together from these two sources as the main sources. And what the Americans have, as I said, is a second-hand information or a second-level information from Turks.
Carl, as we said, this is something that the UN rapporteur has taken on her own. Why do you think there has not been more of a unified push from the UN?
That's a difficult question. Well, no, it's a difficult question to answer, but it's an easy question to answer as well. The trouble with the UN is that the UN, on certain occasions, can be overtly politicized. And we've seen this time and time again, particularly with the Security Council, insofar as what is going on in certain parts of the world, particularly Syria. So action can be pushed through the UN. We can push for action to be taken. But we are still relying on member states to either table that action, or once the proposed action has been tabled, for other states to vote in support of it. It's not necessarily able to just take action unilaterally as the United Nations. So as a result, we then have to factor in the political position, the states' political allegiances, trade alliances, military alliances, etc., etc. And this is where it's problematic. The positive element, as far as the UN special rapporteurs are concerned, is that they are wholly independent. They have no allegiance, political, diplomatic, or otherwise, and therefore they can act of their own volition, just as importantly the special rapporteur has on this occasion.
Sultan, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, because I think it goes back to something you said earlier. I'm curious why you think the UN as a body has not been more forceful about this, and does it really come down to politics between countries?
It does, very much so. I think Saudi Arabia had done very interesting move by conducting its investigation and then announcing some results without really showing anyone concrete evidence of what actually happened and on what basis those people were indicted. But by doing so, they have for some time, they have taken the pressure off them for the time being. And then, of course, we moved into the period of Christmas, New Year, elections everywhere, other priorities arise. And then the issue has, although may not have been totally forgotten, it has dropped in terms of attention vis-a-vis the media and certainly the politics within the member states. Added to that, the fact that, this is my own observation, is that Turkey has not really pushed for it to be an issue that can be debated at the state levels. They have made it an issue of general conscious of people. It's a human rights issue. It's about the murder of one individual, and they have not really pushed for it on the agenda of it being a breach of their sovereignty and an act that should lead to international consequences.
Go ahead.
If I may add also, I think the fact that Saudi Arabia gave concessions in relation to Yemen did help their case a little bit as far as the European Union countries are concerned. You know, a lot of people have seen or saw this incident as part of a pattern of misjudged decisions by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. On top of those was Yemen, which has developed into a major humanitarian disaster. And by allowing the talks in Sweden to go ahead and now reducing the level of bombardment across Yemen and trying to support the peace effort of the peace envoy, Saudi has also lifted a little bit of that additional pressure coming, particularly from the European countries.
So, Carl, let's talk about that pattern that Sultan just referenced. Yes, it was the murder of one person, and clearly that life has value, but it's about much more than that. And you've said that there is not only a moral obligation to do something, you say there may even be a legal obligation to look into this and to do something about this on the part of European countries. How so?
Well, look, I think there is an absolute obligation. But we need to take a couple of steps back before we actually get to Khashoggi's murder. Saudi Arabia is a serial violator of human rights. That is just fact. It is, both domestically and internationally, when we take into account what is happening in Yemen. Saudi Arabia has been able to distance itself or put the cloak over those human rights violations to a certain extent because of its strong ties with the US, with countries within the European Union, as far as diplomatically, trade, militarily, etc. is concerned. But there comes a point when states need to decide what is more important. Is trade more important, or are the human rights and lives of individuals more important? And this is where I come down to the moral obligation to investigate not only Khashoggi's murder in the territory of another sovereign state, but also looking back at the domestic human rights violations being committed, and then looking at the human rights violations and war crimes, crimes against humanity that are allegedly being committed in Yemen. There is that moral obligation. It is incumbent upon all of us, all states, to look at this more closely and actually seek to take action. Simply asking for action to be taken and asking for change to be brought about is not going to secure that change.
When you look at how Saudi Arabian officials were received at Davos just a few days ago, largely as if nothing happened, aren't countries basically answering the question over and over again, what matters more to them? Carl?
I think to a certain extent, some countries are. Some countries are looking to criticize on the one hand, but are normalizing relations on the other hand. And you can't expect to affect real change by this being done. Countries must be prepared to take a stand, but it will take a unified approach to do so. Now, as far as this investigation is concerned, this investigation can look to build momentum, and it can look to again start the ball rolling as far as action can be taken. Let's not forget that Saudi Arabia is an elected member of the Human Rights Council, and there was much shock when it was elected to the council, given its own appalling record on human rights. But that's only really because it was unopposed as far as the area is concerned. Now, the UN General Assembly can suspend them from the Human Rights Council if there is a two-thirds majority to do so. And the results of this investigation may go some way to look at action being taken through the General Assembly as far as membership of the Human Rights Council is concerned. Then, as I say, action needs to be taken as far as its domestic human rights violations and those other violations that are being committed in other areas of the world.
You know, Sultan, you said a few moments ago that, obviously this has not gotten as much attention as it did in the month or two after Khashoggi was murdered. And Saudi Arabia, made some arrests. Do you think that their strategy has been just to try to run out the clock, for lack of a better term?
Well, obviously they're playing for time, but also they're playing to what the Western countries really expect them to do, and that is most importantly to be seen to be taking action, and that's what they've done. Now they haven't. It's not conclusive as yet, but they have shown a willingness to investigate and to accuse a number of people directly, and now they're holding them in prison. And so on. So the fact that they've engaged, I think, has been interpreted as a positive thing overall. And you could see the difference between the way you referred earlier to the way they were met in Davos and the way countries and individuals boycotted their investment conference in Jeddah shortly after the killing of Khashoggi. So clearly the international mood, I think, has moved on, and it is now down to human rights agendas, I think human rights groups, and ultimately to Turkey to really decide whether they want to come up with the full evidence they hold, or they are still waiting to see what others can find out. I personally think there is much more that Turkey is holding on this on the killing.
Carl, do you agree with that Turkey knows much more and that perhaps at some point we may know that?
I don't know is my honest answer to that. I agree to the extent that I would be surprised if Turkey had completely shown its hand. Whether there is a lot more evidence to come, I honestly don't know and wouldn't like to say. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was more to be disclosed at present.
Can
We'll have to see.
Can something truly concrete, Carl, can something truly concrete come from this process that the rapporteur has started?
Well, it depends on how we view something truly concrete. As my colleague Sultan has said, 21 people have been accused in Riyadh. 9 of those are indicted. And again, as has been said, I get the feeling that this is Saudi Arabia doing just enough to give other countries cover for normalizing relations. It's appeasing those critics to a certain extent. So on the one hand, we could look at it and say, well, to a certain extent, Saudi Arabia have accepted what they have been accused of. I mean, granted, they haven't accepted that an order came from Mohammed bin Salman. Their starting point was that he hadn't been killed, that nothing had happened, and through the release of evidence, they then accepted that this had actually happened within the embassy. The reaction of the international community and the boycotting of certain events forced Saudi Arabia to take some action. Now, of course, the action hasn't gone as far as we would have liked it to have gone, but arguably something has happened, something positive has come out of this. This investigation that will now be commenced, there is significant potential for further steps to be taken as far as positive change coming about as a result. As I say, it depends on how we quantify what concrete action is. We can look at it from the one hand that people are going to be tried for the crime. Now, whether that trial is credible, whether it adheres to fair trial rights, is an entirely different matter, and I suspect that it won't. So, but that is action on the one hand. Now, will it bring about wholesale reform as far as Saudi Arabia and its approach to human rights domestically and internationally is concerned? Then no, I don't think it will go that far the other way. But I think that we have to look at this as a step-by-step process as far as bringing about real change. There is appetite internationally for change to be brought about. There is a degree of appetite domestically in Saudi Arabia for change, but we are further down the line than we were, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So if we look at this on an incremental basis, then there is potential for something concrete to come out of the investigation, certainly.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for the discussion and for your time. Appreciate it very much. Sultan Barakat, Carl Buckley, thank you. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime. Go to our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter as well. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Rochelle Carey, and the entire team. Bye for now.